All right, hello and welcome to our session on the social media phenomenon known as House of Highlights. My name is Rick Maese. I'm a sports reporter for the Washington Post. I cover a variety of topics there, including media and tech issues at times. That probably means I'm only the fourth smartest person on this stage right now when it comes to some of this stuff. So I'll be the one asking the questions, and I'll leave it to you guys to provide some of the insight. House of Highlights is genius. It's simple. It's essential for basketball fans. And what I want to do today, or hope to do today, is kind of explore why it works, what lessons the rest of us should be taking from its success, whether we're content creators, journalists, athletes, brands, or companies. We have a lot of ground to cover, so maybe we'll just kind of start and go down the line. And we'll start with Omar, kind of the man of the hour. It's the brains behind House of Highlights. They have 9.5 million followers on Instagram. To put that in context, that's more than Major League Baseball, more than Tom Brady, more than Shaq, more than the Washington Post, the New York Times, or Bleacher Report. So, Omar, maybe for those that don't know, what is House of Highlights? What makes it unique? And if you have the secret sauce, maybe share that with us too.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of all started when LeBron left the Heat in 2014. I was depressed, and I was looking for clips that related to that Miami Heat team. And I think people usually think of highlights. They think of dunks. They think of crossovers. They think of assists. But the moments that mattered to me and my friends were moments with Mario Chalmers joking on the bench, or Wade and LeBron video bombing LeBron during an interview. And what kind of happened is when LeBron made his decision, I was looking for those clips, and I couldn't find them anywhere. I looked on YouTube, I looked on Twitter, I looked on Vine, and no one was really doing it. So I kind of decided that I was going to do it myself. I went on Instagram. I thought at max I would have 100,000, 200,000 followers, and I posted clips that I thought were funny, whether it would be LeBron making a face, whether it would be a funny celebration. And, now we're at 9.6 million followers. We get 700 million video views in December, and I honestly don't know how we got here, but I'll take it.
Sitting next to Omar is Sandra Lopez. She's a general manager and VP at Intel. And Sandra, I mean, House of Highlights kind of came along at the time when technology was ready. Give us an idea of how quickly that space is changing and how someone like Omar was able to take advantage of it at the right time.
Yeah, so I often like to say that consumer behavior shifts at a radical pace, and then the challenge is that business models don't. And so it's really understanding what's happening from a consumer behavior standpoint and kind of looking at macro trends, the globalization of sports, urbanization, the importance of time, your point about you wanted to see highlights. Oftentimes, we don't have time to sit down and see 2 hours of a sport or for 3 hours. And so you want these snackable highlights to consume. And we're now starting to see another trend with regards to personalization. Each person wants to see a different, what we call all moments. And how do you give the fan that ability to have access to these highlights in multiple different dimensions? And so Intel, we're creating what we're calling the immersive media platform, which is the next generation of content consumption in which any fan can take a look at a play from the angle that they choose. So we did something at the Super Bowl, and they thought that Tom Brady actually had a camera in his helmet, and he didn't have a camera in his helmet. It was actually 38 cameras installed in the venue, and it enables you to be like a bumblebee and kind of pick and choose the angle that you choose, that you would like. So it's really about understanding macro trends from a fan or consumer standpoint and what technology is able to provide, and it's companies like Intel to understand where the future is going and for us to create it.
Down there on the end is Rory Brown. He's the president of Bleacher Report, and he obviously recognized the potential because he brought House of Highlights under his wing. And Rory, you recognize that House of Highlights was a disruptor in this space. How is it changing the way that sports fans consume highlights? What does it tell us about the fan experience and where it's going?
Yeah, I mean, I did not firsthand recognize it. To the credit, Doug Bernstein, who has been on the BR team for quite some time and is now the GM of House of Highlights. He came to me and other executives at BR a couple years ago and said, "Hey, there's this account called House of Highlights. I think we should buy it." I'm like, "Okay, so who runs it?" He's like, "College kid in Florida." I'm like, "Okay." It's like, does he have rights to all this stuff yet? He goes, maybe not. I'm like, cool. Yeah, we should totally buy it. But to Doug's credit, Doug recognized that, and he's been an integral part of BR's growth for quite some time, but recognizing where things are going. And, it's not about trying to watch last night's highlights the next day. It's about being on top of the trends and these subtleties, a lot of which Omar referenced. And I think what he and Doug and team have come up with is really a point of view for House of Highlights that's about community, that's about youth culture, that's about the things that young people in particular care about and want to joke about and talk about when it comes to sports highlights. And some of that is, the insane LeBron dunk versus the Trailblazers that I know hit some kind of record for views at one point. But a lot of it's just like, Austin Rivers and Doc Rivers like moving their hands, their gestures at the same time, right? So there's these nuances that people really, really appreciate, and that's kind of the direction this is going, where we don't have to wait for these, kind of big, broad highlights the next day. You can get this stuff in real time, which means you can go a level deeper and celebrate these things faster. Okay,
we're going to explore all these broader issues in better detail, but Omar, let's go back to your origin story. I mean, you're 24 years old, which frankly...
24 right now.
Well, frankly, it pisses me off a little bit, so So you start this account, and it's for fun, and it's to kind of entertain yourself. When did you recognize the potential? When did you realize that you were kind of onto something that was more than kind of a dorm room hobby?
Yeah, I think people, usually ask for, like, was there a video that took off? There really wasn't a video that took off. I think consistency, I was consistent for, like, 6 months. And then kind of at that 6 months point, I think we had 400, 500,000 followers. And I'm like, this is growing at an insane speed. Because I had done YouTube videos, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Before I was a kid, I was like 14. And, the growth on that was so slow. And then, I started an Instagram page, and it has 500,000 followers in 6 months. You're like, this is getting insane. And then that's around the time when celebrities started following the account. So like Snoop Dogg, I remember calling my dad like, hey, do you know who Snoop Dogg is? Like, he followed House of Highlights. And, now we got LeBron liking, reposting, and everything. So it's gotten crazy. But, that 6 month point with the growth being so high and the likes being so high, and you saw the engagement where, you put up a post and would get 5,000 comments. And you're like, and everyone is just tagging their friends and everyone's talking with one another. And you're like, this is becoming something really, really big.
And take us through your typical day, because I don't think people can appreciate what actually goes into it. And I know right now your phone's in your pocket, and you're probably going crazy because you're not checking it. Yeah. But tell us how House of Highlights happens every day. Yeah,
so it depends. Like, let's go into the NBA season. Right now it's a bunch of traveling because there's the draft, there's the NBA awards. But during the season, you kind of wake up at 9 a.m. and you check 500 DMs. So I think that was one of the first things that House of Highlights kind of did, is we encourage fans to send in clips. And we get 500 DMs, and that takes 2-3 hours. And sometimes it's little messages asking for advice, and sometimes it's people sending in legit content that they worked on. And I think also a good thing that we did was when someone submitted a clip that we liked and we got permission and we cleared it, we credited them for sending us that clip. So people would be encouraged to send us clips because they would be able to tell their friends, like, hey, I'm on House of Highlights, look, they tagged me in the post. So I get through, you start the day at 9 a.m., go to 2-3 hours of DMs, finish with that, then you do the whole clearances, and after the 500 DMs, you'll probably end up with like 2 or 3 clips that you like. So that can be frustrating, where you're going through so much material and you're not really sure if it's worth it at the end. Mm-hmm. But eventually you get to your 2-3 clips that you like. You do. You then now, since we're invitation only with House of Highlights, we've had a lot of opportunities to work with brands. So we spend the next 3-4 hours working with brands and coming up with ideas of making content for House of Highlights, because the content for House of Highlights is different, right? So like when I was with Ben Simmons at the NBA Awards show, I didn't ask him anything about Donovan Mitchell. I asked him why he thinks PUBG is a better video game than Fortnite, right? Because like that just is a conversation that relates to 12 to 24-year-olds. That's what we're debating when we're at home. And then after that, the games start, and it's 7 p.m. to 1 a.m., and you kind of repeat that for every single day for almost 4 years now.
Omar, would you ever use artificial intelligence to help?
I mean, of course. So we'll talk right after this.
Yeah.
Rory, maybe you can kind of pick this up for me. When you guys acquired House of Highlights in I think late 2016, it had fewer than 1 million followers. Were you guys concerned then about how you can monetize this thing, especially something that lives on kind of this third-party platform?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of the way the media world works now, right? Where a lot of content is living on these third-party platforms, which means you don't control everything. There's algorithm changes, whether it's Facebook or Google, or somebody could levy a tax. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. But at BR, we do diversify our audience quite a bit. So that's across platforms. We also have an app that has a ton of loyal users. So we have owned and operated inventory as well, so that we can be a little riskier when it comes to some of these plays. And in House of Highlights, we didn't just see it as like a pure, oh, here's our way to grow Instagram traction really quickly. Like, we're doing that through BR pretty effectively to begin with, and we continue to do that. But we saw it as a way to, we really think about kind of the funnel of users, and BR is really good at appealing to 18 to 35-year-old sports fans. But you just heard Omar say it, like, he's got something that really appeals to 12 to 24-year-old sports fans. So that's that point where you're figuring out who you are as a sports fan, as a consumer. And we have not been afraid to lead in areas where the monetization strategy is not crystal clear at first. But we know the audience is there, we know the consumption habits are there, and now we just have to go out and educate the market. And now it's still really an invitation-only approach to how we monetize House of Highlights. We're really careful. We don't want to screw up the brand, but we're making money through House of Highlights, and credit to Omar, Doug, and others for coming up with inventive ways. And it's a much more consultative approach with clients where we're saying, hey, what problem are you trying to solve? How are you looking to reach young people? Here's how House of Highlights and BR, a combination of the two, could do it, versus saying, hey, here's a homepage takeover, like, take it or leave it. Like, that's not the future, and everyone knows that.
What are some examples of some of the inventive ways, maybe Omar, you can weigh on this too, that you guys have kind of tapped into?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
I think my favorite one is probably the Curry Challenge, where we kind of, Under Armour had this thing, and the Curry Challenge had kind of already started, and we were able to kind of put together videos relating to that Curry Challenge. And I think the best one, I might be wrong here, but it got like 3 million views, which in 2017, according to Brandtail, was the highest viewed branded video on all of Instagram. So that was fun because we got to go work with influencers and kind of create our own content. And you get nervous about it at first because you want to live up to the expectations, and I think we kind of blew past them. So that was great.
Can you touch on that for us, Rory?
I think so Howard Mittman, who's our CRO, CMO, and he's with me in New York, and we kind of co-manage the office here. He has this line that I like a lot that he says, there's no such thing as branded content, there's good content, there's bad content, right? So like, branded content can be really good. Curry Challenge was an example of that. Like, branded content can also be awful. Like, normal content without a brand attached to it can be awful. So I think for us, it's just ideating and coming up with things that we know young people are going to respond to. And then once clients see that, it's like, oh, okay, like, we want what that brand had, right? Like, the Curry Challenge was effective not just for Under Armour, but other brands coming to us and saying, how do we do that? And we come back and say, well, you've got to give us a lot of control over how we're going to do this thing, because we know the audience, like, we know the brand, like, versus, working within the confines of a very specific RFP, which may or may not relate that well to young people.
Let's touch on the audience a little bit more, because it seems like a unique one, and maybe Sandra, you can weigh in on this too, but this is a group that are, I assume, multicultural, young, they're accessing this content all hours a day, carrying it in their pockets. How hard has it been traditionally to reach them, and how much easier now, or how is House of Highlights taking advantage of that group?
I'll look at it from an intel perspective. Interesting. Oftentimes we talk about demographics and age, and I'm a big fan of House of Highlights. So, and I'm over 40. But at Intel, it's not about demographics, it's about attitudes and your passion and how you want to consume content. And so I think the challenge for everybody and the opportunity is that we got to give fans choice. So choices in business models. Is it subscription-based? Is it virtual tickets? And it's not one answer, it's all of it. What we're starting to see with videos is the curation. Same thing around Spotify, right? You use artificial intelligence and algorithms to carefully curate what Rory would like to see, and also give the opportunity of discovery. And so from our perspective is really spending time understanding each individual fan, and how do you create experiences that are individual yet can scale. And I think that's where one of the opportunities are in terms of technologies and R&D that are scalable yet personal.
Mm-hmm. I guess when we talk about algorithms, Omar, how do you know when something's going to pop? Because I'm not sure there's a formula for that, but somehow you've had that figured out for years now. How do you know?
Sensibilities, I think a lot of it is experience, but I think, kind of when I was going into it, I'm like, I have a few friends, I'm like, do you guys find this funny? And if they find it funny, then it's something that's going to work.
Okay.
That was kind of the way I started it. At this point, I think the audience has gotten so big, so there's little changes here and there. I think when House of Highlights first started, it was a lot of, had to do with like athletes and squatting a lot of weight, and people thought that was like the most interesting thing, and now it's kind of pivoted to being influencer focused and funny. So now, since it's very comedy focused, the sensibilities are a little bit different, but I've kind of learned them over the years because you do it every single day for like 4 years now, so you kind of have to learn. And what are some examples of things that do pop? Because I know game highlights is a portion of it, but some of the best content, the funniest content, has nothing to do with the sport itself. Yeah, I think there was a soccer clip this weekend that kind of popped up, and we signed a talent called Supreme Dreams. Real name is Mark Phillips, and he had a soccer video, and he combined the two things that are relevant is anime and soccer. And he says if soccer was an anime. And that video got 45,000 retweets, and he combined the two, cartoon and a sport, and people thought it was absolutely hilarious. So that's kind of been the one video that really popped off this weekend. I think it's a great example of that. I wonder how much thought goes into some of the posts. So someone DMs you a video, you just throw it up as quickly as you can. How much you study analytics? What kind of intentionality is there behind a certain post? Yeah, I think when I first started, I wasn't huge on analytics. A lot of it was gut and just knowing like, hey, this is a good piece of content. I'm just going to put it out there. I think now sometimes you look at analytics in the sense of like, okay, it's better to post something at night than 7 in the morning. So that's really it. I don't look too much into it. When I get a DM that I like, I watch it a few times. I take a break for 30 minutes, and I watch it again to see if I still enjoy it. Because the one thing that happens sometimes is you might watch something and at first you think it's great, and then when you watch it again, you're like, oh, it's nothing crazy happened. So the only trick that I really do is I watch it a few times, and I take a gap in between when I watch it. Okay. Why do we think this works for the NBA? Why can't this be replicated for every league and for every cast of characters and every sports fan audience out there? Yeah, it's for me. For Rory, you, Sandra, anybody? I'll take it. Okay. Ha. I think the NBA is really good about like letting the players be themselves and have personalities and let, obviously they're amazing athletes, but tend to know a lot about NBA players. Like, I use this example a lot. Like Damian Lillard is, I don't know, like where he ranks as far as like the most popular NBA players or most well known. But he's not at the very, very top. He's a superstar for sure, but like I know he's interested in music, and he's rapped before and these other things where, if you try to do that with a top 30 NFL player, I don't think you'd know as much, right? So with that comes a level of investment from fans that they view these people as superhuman athletes. They also view them as people that are just like them and their friends on social media who like, we actually have a whole sizzle that we show sometimes that shows athletes being like goofy on the House of Highlights account and, tagging other people and talking like shit in the comments to each other. And I can say shit, I think, right? And it's really great because it's like you get to see this human side that you don't get to see in a post-game interview or a press conference where, LeBron or whoever is honestly just trying not to say something that's going to get taken out of context. They're just being themselves. And I wonder, do we see that more in the off season? I mean, they do so much crazy stuff. I think like the banana boat, or you guys go on vacation and they open up a window into their personal lives. I mean, do you look forward to the off season because we get to kind of see some of that? Yeah, I mean, the NBA is 24/7. Like even right now, we're trying to find out where Kawhi Leonard's going. So then we're going to react to that. But I also love that all these guys kind of get together. And I think some of the biggest things last summer was like LeBron, KD, and Carmelo having a pickup game during the summer of last year, and everyone was just amazed that those three would, willingly choose to get together and play against each other during July. But what's also cool is, like, I think Rory kind of touched on it, is like people were one of the highest viewed videos on House of Highlights last season was the Cavs taking the subway to their hotel, and no one could believe that these athletes and LeBron James would willingly choose to go on a subway and go to their hotel. I mean, it was the most viewed video, and I think part of that is like, oh, they're just like us. And I think that's kind of the big thing that House of Highlights kind of hit on. I think, too, like, I mean, we watch them and their clothing they wear before games, what they say after games. Like, the game is just a small part of it. Yeah. I think, like exactly what I was saying with Ben Simmons, like, people want to know what these guys are up to and what their real life is like. I think there's two aspects of it. Either they want the athlete to be someone they can relate to, or they want to say to themselves, like, I would love to hang out with that guy. And those are the two pillars that kind of really matter to athletes today.
That's right, because we did some research and we were trying to learn, well, how can we deliver more entertaining content as part of our experiences? And a lot of the fans were highlighting, well, we want to see what's happening behind the scenes. And it goes back to social media from an overall platform it's all about accessibility, and so providing access to those athletes and hearing their stories and what they wear and the fashion is really, really important. So it's going just beyond the live game, and it's everything that's happening during the season, off season, and I think that's one of the reasons why you're so successful.
Thank you.
Rory, let's go back to the monetization a little bit and maybe look forward in the future of this, because you guys basically acquired a brand that was hugely popular and growing, but existed on this one platform. How did you guys brainstorm other uses for it? Where else is this going?
Well, I think with House of Highlights, I mean, we never saw it as an Instagram account. We saw it as a brand that people really feel invested in and believe in. So, once you start talking about brands, like now you're not constricted by, just another media company, right? And I've said this to Omar, to Doug, to the senior BR content and programming leaders a lot, that A, it's really important to me that BR and House of Highlights stay differentiated in some ways. B, it's important they collaborate where it makes sense. And then C, it's like, let's not make House of Highlights another media company. Like Bleacher Report's already a media company that's owned by a bigger media company in Turner, that's owned by a bigger media company in Time Warner that just got bought by a telephone company. Like, we need to keep House of Highlights separate from that and really run it as a business within the business. And with that, comes monetization brainstorming, where it's not just about traditional advertising, it's about merch, it's about events, it's about things where, there's people graduating from college or high school, or people in undergrad now that they want desperately to work for Omar, to be Omar. We should take advantage of that, right? And not ask for dollars, but make it this really cool place to work that, again, BR is a great place to work too. It's just separate. So there's more opportunities to build the brand, and with that comes different strategies.
Were there inherent obstacles? The NBA has kind of leaned in when it comes to letting companies use their video highlights, but were there licensing issues in trying to monetize what's essentially someone else's content?
Well, I think that's where BR's probably been one of the one of the better things for Omar is that, it's no secret, he was kind of just running with some content beforehand. And credit to the NBA, they get the big picture, and they get that they just want as many people around the world seeing their content and knowing their players and teams and uniforms, and that comes they were very aggressive early on, or sorry, not aggressive early on with YouTube. There's a lot of NBA highlights on YouTube that could have been taken down. I'm sure we saw Major League Baseball and other leagues be a lot more aggressive. So Omar just kind of ran with that, and then who better to work with than Bleacher Report, who actually through Turner owns those rights. So, and then some. So, the NBA is, I think they're fascinated by House of Highlights by BR and how we, view social as a way to grow brand and audience, but not think about it as traditional traffic back to a Bleacher Report website. And we've seen the leagues and honestly a lot of other media publishers kind of follow suit and start to think about it the same way.
Mm-hmm. Omar, let me ask you that, because I remember a few years back, certain leagues sent out basically cease and desist orders.
Yeah.
In the Wild West days of this, did you get much pushback?
No, I didn't get any pushback at all, but I stayed away from the NFL and the MLB kind of for that reason. I think what's interesting...
I didn't call them out, by the way. You did that.
Okay, so those leagues...
Football and baseball.
So what was interesting during that time, too, is when people on Twitter would just be posting those clips, there would be cease and desist sent. So I kind of knew from that aspect when, some of these media brands were actually getting taken down off Twitter, that I should probably stay away from those leagues. But what's been interesting is, now we're in 2018, House of Highlights has gotten so big. Those same leagues that were sending cease and desist orders are now DMing us like, hey, if there's any clip that you guys want posted on House of Highlights for free, let us know. And I think that's been the most surprising pivot is 2 years ago, they probably would have shut me down if I posted their content. Now they're just asking if they're begging, kind of like, can we post your content? We would love if you posted our content.
They're probably serving their fan. I think
yeah.
The fans actually will raise their hand and tell you where they want to see the content, and they're responding to the market demands.
Yeah, there's no, outside of sports, there's not a whole other opportunities for young people to want to sit in front of the TV with commercials and watch something for 3 to 3.5 hours. Like, it's a totally foreign concept for a young person to do that for anything. So this notion
adults.
What's that?
You don't have time. Even adults, right? It's 3 hours is very tough.
Yeah. So it's like, like that's 3 episodes of Stranger Things or something like way more valuable. So it's like, so at that point you've got to go where the audience is, and that's where, like, at BR we've always been very accepting of where we own audience and where there's audience out there we need to go get. And it was one of those like build or buy situations. And with Omar, he was already building something so impressive. It's like why do we've already built a lot of great things at BR. Why don't we supercharge them with House of Highlights and vice versa versus try and build something brand new? The same way that Turner looked at Bleacher Report, honestly, 6 years ago when we got acquired. So you've just got to go where the eyeballs are.
How hard is that to keep track of? Because the landscape changes so fast, and today might be Instagram, tomorrow could be something totally different.
Yes, I mean, it's hard. We were talking before this about like the whole Instagram TV kind of initiative, and they're still figuring it out. And I think at BR we are pretty careful about, and Omar has the same instincts. I think that's why he and Doug got along. One of the reasons he and Doug got along so well early on, to not just like chase the latest great new thing, but to actually like think about this and to think about the brand. And like we'll do something with IGTV for sure, the same way we've experimented as kind of the platforms come out with new tools and ways to get content in front of people. But we're pretty comfortable being a fast follow at Bleacher Report, where we see kind of how audiences are responding, how advertisers are responding, and then actually coming up with a strategy versus saying like, oh my gosh, this new shiny thing, we've got to chase it. So we're constantly talking about that shift in the landscape, but the last thing we want to do is give people whiplash just by chasing this, for 5 minutes and then only to ditch it and go chase this instead.
I also think like the ecosystem is coming together. So you have the sports industry, you have advertising and brand, and Silicon Valley, the tech industry, is actively engaged with sports and trying to identify, well, what is the next new technology? So NBA announced a Playmaker Fund with Intel to look, there's over 1,800 new technologies that are out there. And 1 or 2 or maybe 100, it's going to hit, and it's going to change how consumers consume content. So it is the entire ecosystem together, sharing best practices. We have a partnership with Turner and looking at what are emerging technology trends, what is consumer behavior happening, hearing from the athletes, listening to the broadcasters, producers, and starting to garner insights. And it's a lot of tests. It's a lot of, I always like to highlight, it's continuous beta. So how do you learn, how do you gather insights, and how do you evolve? I'm assuming like you're highlighting that you keep on looking at how are people responding, the feedback, the analytics, and you're continuously evolving your product.
Yeah, we check the comments, right? And that's where people are going to react. We check the likes, we check the views. So you kind of have, and the DMs too. So people, if there's something that they don't like, people are going to let us know. And I think you kind of go learn from that feedback, and you understand what's the next move that you got to make, and that's kind of how you make most of your decisions.
Yeah, your DM's got to be great. You're like a Kardashian,
yeah.
basically. Do you ever hear from like LeBron or someone like that when you post a highlight?
So that's also one of the most surprising things, and I won't say names, but some of the biggest NBA athletes are sending in clips to House of Highlights asking if they can get posted.
Just say one name, like the
I
last
cannot
name.
tell you one name. But I was talking to JJ Redick about this, and he thought it was interesting that I was on his podcast.
I'm really going to twist your arm.
I was on his podcast, and we were talking about a lot of these guys are a little insecure. So when all their friends kind of all follow House of Highlights, so it's kind of their moment where they can kind of brag about it. And I think the most surprising thing is like it's never the 13th guy on the bench. It's max players and all-stars.
When I think about taking advantage of the technology, I don't know that leagues or teams or even some traditional media can replicate what Omar does, because there's kind of an authenticity and a personality that's reflected there. Have we seen copycats try to pop up? And Rory, how difficult do you think it would be for someone to do this?
I think it'd be really hard. I think there's accounts in sports and in other media accounts that have huge followings. Like, you've got millions and millions of people that follow the accounts. But if they were to suddenly kind of, shift on a dime and start, not just posting the same content as Omar, which we see that quite a bit, but try and use the same voice, like people would just be thrown off by it. It'd be like, it's like I really respect what my dad thinks of Led Zeppelin. I don't really respect what he thinks of like the Drake Pusha T feud. Like that would just be weird. Like why would my dad ever bring that up? Like on the phone with him. So and I think there's already a reaction to that where you'll see. I'm not going to name names, but you'll see
JJ Redick.
You'll see some media accounts, post things, and it's like, guys, like, come on, like House of Highlights literally posted that 7 minutes ago, and then they'll post it with, kind of a similar caption, but it's like, it just doesn't work. So, but that said, I think there's no room for Bleacher Report and House of Highlights to get lazy here. We need to continue to be industry leaders when it comes to all things, especially social, where we really are best in class. But one thing that's really important to me is that the team continues to innovate and come up with new types of content, new ways to frame content, new ways to build brand that isn't just relying on a playbook that we're really good at, but we are starting to see other media companies try and copy it.
We're running out of time, but I want to make sure we touch on a little bit of basketball. The finals are over. We know the offseason is going to be crazy. Give me an idea of how you prep for that. What do you do if something happens with Leonard today or LeBron opts out tomorrow, especially if you don't have like some kind of video, some kind of fresh video of him, signing a piece of paper or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have 4 years of video if you think about it, because I just have this big catalog and database of all of Paul George's stuff, all of LeBron's stuff. So a lot of that is like user-generated content. So I'll give you guys a sneak peek for like Paul George. When he opts out, there was a video 4 years ago where he's like, I'm going back to Cali. So if he signs with the Lakers, that's going to be the clip that we run and it'd be like, hey, he was talking about this 4 years ago. So those are kind of the little ways. I don't want to give all my secrets away, but there's a lot of different ways you can kind of attack when someone does something in free agency. Like our biggest day, I think last summer, was when Kyrie was asked for the trade. And there was just a bunch of old footage that I could just use from Kyrie that worked really well.
So you must know, or maybe I'm assuming something, but when LeBron signs somewhere this summer, will that be the biggest day for you guys?
I mean, and it's going to be a big day for Bleacher Report as well. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of videos that we use kind of reacting to it in a fun way, and hopefully people share it.
I want to thank you guys all for being on this panel and chatting with us, and thank everybody here for joining us. And make sure you check out House of Highlights to stay on top of everything all summer long.
Thank you.
Thank you.